Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Maisris, Perikei Halacha Aleph. We're learning today Daf Mem, and we left off on Daf Mem Amid Aleph, 6 lines from the top of the Amid by the brackets, by the 2 dots. We are dedicating today's class for the wedding, for the chasana that's taking place, God willing, today, of Shalom Berkowitz with our very own Esther Blauner. May Hashem bless the Chasan Kala and their families, that they should go to the Chuppah B'Shatayva Mitzlachas and to build a being an Adiyad, and may our community continue to be blessed with many more simchas. Amen.
Amen.
Now, we just left off learning regarding the case of the Mishnah, where one is planting, the examples were given, the lefes or the tzanoinois, right? Let's get into it, the turnip or the radish, and the person uprooted it. And these items, when they are replanted, at some point after its replantation, it will become completely inedible. The bulb becomes hardened seeds. The roots that used to be edible will become completely hard and inedible. And at that point, when you reharvest it the second time, none of it will be chayiv in maisres. So we learned that the Chachamim made a gzeira, since you have now an item that is edible, you have to be ma'asid it, not to, so to say, take away the maisres from the Kahanim and the Leviim. That's what we learned in the Mishnah. And the Gemara brought a Tosefta, and the Tosefta added to this, that if someone is planning to be mafkir, their lefes and senoinois, they also have to be ma'aser prior to being mafkirit, because as we know, that if hefker happens to produce prior to its gemar malacha, it will never have to be tithed. The problem with that is that we understand it was implied from a Mishnah and Peah that there is no such rule. If a person is choosing to declare one's produce ownerless, they do not have to be tithed ma'aser prior to that declaration. And the resolution of that is that you're right. If a person is being mafkir something, you don't have to be ma'asid it prior. The unique case, both of the Mishnah and of the Tosefta that we learned yesterday, is where the original is going to remain. In other words, the case of hefker would be that for whatever reason, the person has these small radishes, and they're declaring that when I replant it, the new growths, the gidulin, should be hefker, meaning that the original will be his. And now let's add this concept that we concluded yesterday's share with, that Bein le Rabbi Yochanan, like Reish Lakish, by rabbinic tevel, we say tevel batel beroiv. So even though the original theoretically should still be under the obligation of tithing because the original was not declared ownerless, but in the case where more gidulin will grow beyond the original, there's going to be more gedulin than the ikar, and the ikar will become batal b'roiv, and because of the bittul, it will also be exempted thereof. So where there's going to be bittul, we don't want bittul to happen, and there indeed, like the Tosefta writes, you have to be toinim u'ma'aser. That's what we left off yesterday. What we will start today is, again, we're going to refer back to the same case of the plantation of the lefes and the tzenoinos, and we're going to have another gevaldik application of being that tevel is batal beroiv. Something will have to happen in order for us not to rely on this din of bittul. And that's going to be vis-a-vis when you planted the radishes the first go around in the second year, and you're planning to replant it, and it's going to be readied in the third year. And if you remember, there's another issue. Second year after the Meiser Rishon, you take Meiser Sheni. Third year after the Meiser Rishon, you take the Meiser Ani. And when you're going to have more of the gidulin over the ikir, so even though theoretically the ikir belongs to the second year, it's going to become bottled in the third year. So you're going to be mevatel the Meiser Sheni. And therefore, there's going to be another set of laws. In other words, we're going to have in the beginning of today's share this great application that we do things to make sure that bittul doesn't change the rule. We don't like to initially rely on bittul. Al derech, we said, ein mevatlin iser lechatchila. That's going to be the first tickle of today's daf. And from there, we're going to move on to the next case in the Mishnah, in Halacha Aleph. The Mishnah spoke about someone who is storing onions on their attic, on their gag. Happens to be that their roof or their attic has some dirt or some soil on the ground. And it happened that these onions took root. Not it was the intention for the person, for it to take root. The intention was for storage. That is one important step that will have consequence. And number two, it was not planted like onions are normally planted, which would be that the bulb is under or in the soil. It remained above the soil. So it doesn't even look like a normal plantation. And the Mishnah gave us a Gavaldik rule. The Mishnah only spoke about in this case, not where there was a mapoilus. In this case, where you put it for storage and it took root, even though you don't want it to take root, it wasn't your intention. I know I said two different things, and that's also, it's not your intention, or is it that Yitaka didn't want? That's even more. We'll get into that today. So the Mishnah says, you know what happened? It is now pure. And as we, just to review these laws, food items, while they are attached, are not subject to the laws of Tumah and Tara. And more, even if something was already Tameh, let's remember these halachas. Imagine you have food, you have an onion that became Tameh. If it's now going to be reattached, if you replanted it, it loses its Tumah. Gavaldik. So the Mishnah says that such an onion becomes tahar from its Tumah. And now I'll speak out what we infer from the Mishnah that we will learn at the end of today's shir in a Tosefta befedish, but le'inyan maisris, le'inyan shvias, it's not attached. What does that mean? So guys, chazara of dinim that are all new to me. It's very exciting. Whenever a vegetable grows without it being attached, just to know such a thing is possible.
Water.
Huh?
In water.
Like I know this from my science, the science that we do in Cheder Menachem, that I did in my Cheder in Brazil, is we take an onion and we put it in water. We get very scientific, and imagine, and it grows. It's not attached to the ground. That growth is not chayiv in maisris. So therefore, this onion that took root in the soil, on the attic, on the roof, and it grew, that additional growth does not have to be maisrit. Why? Because it's not attached. It's attached le'inyan tuma. It's not attached le'inyan maisris. Another thing, shvius, as we learned in Masechta Shvius, there is a rabbinic prohibition of eating sfichei shvius. Sfichei shvius by default means items that you did not plant intentionally, but it planted itself and it grew. This is like it grew by itself. If this happened on the 7th year, rabbinically, you would not be allowed to eat the addition because you're not allowed to eat sfichei shvius. I know there are exceptions, but that was the rule. So we are allowed to eat it. In other words, it's only attached le'inyan tuma. It's not attached le'inyan maiser and shvius. That's what we learned in the Mishnah. Again, the explicit is tumah and tara. The implicit, which we'll learn today explicitly in a Tosefta, ava le'inyan maiseres u'shvius, it's not attached. What about Shabbos? And b'hashgacha pratis, today, koyach adar, tavshan peivav. It's so amazing for the people that are in the train of the learning 3 Prakim Rambam. No work is happening, guys. Hashem shall bless us with parnasa, because between the Rambam and davening, that's it. The sale Hashem has to make lachatchila riba amen for all of us. So we're learning Elchas Shabbos. On Shabbos, one of the lamates malachas is to be koitzer. You're not allowed to detach something that's attached to the ground. Our Mishnah and the Tosefta never spoke about Shabbos, right? They spoke about Tumah and Tara, Maisres, Shvius. What about Shabbos? Machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan says that if someone were to detach these onions on Shabbos, pater. Now, just for the record, pater doesn't mean that it's completely permitted. Pater does mean that you're not violating a biblical violation. You're not chayiv chatas. It's taka asan midrabanan, but you're not chayiv chatas. Reish Lakish says you are chayiv chatas. And the Gemara is going to wonder whether Reish Lakish, who argues with Rabbi Yochanan, does he only argue b'negei Shabbos? Or maybe Reish Lakish is even arguing b'negei Shvius. As we'll speak out more, that's going to be today's daf. And Chavra, let's dive right in. So we have daf mem by the brackets, or by the 2 dots, 6 lines from the top. Yes, we are going back to the same case that we just came from, which is a person is planting the lefes and the tsunoinus. So the Mishnah said that if you are replanting it, lizera, now that's a very key word. When you replant it, don't think that the root becomes hard right away. Nothing works that way. You are replanting it because you want for the radish to no longer be edible. You want for the radish to turn into a seed. It becomes completely inedible. When that happens, the stem also becomes inedible. That's what we explained. So since it's going to become completely not oichel, so the Chachamim said, now it's oichel, you're making it into a non-oichel, shkoyach, before you do that, bima aser. So now the Gemara wants to know what happens if someone is replanting these items, but they don't want it to stay in the ground until when it becomes inedible. They just want it to grow a little bit more. Maybe this would be like the opening case in the Mishnah. What was the opening case in the Mishnah? That if you're Shereya Shesalim, like the onion, you replant it, the Mishnah says you don't have to be ma'asid. Be ma'asid when it's completely ready. So that's the machlokes here, Amayraim. That's the first thing the Gemara says. So Amar Rav Mana, that indeed, since the Mishnah says lezera, that you replanted it in order for it to develop into the seed, and that's why you chayiv prior to replanting it. That's taka only if your kavana was lezera. But if you are replanting it loichal, which means you're not planning to leave it in the ground the second time around long enough for it to turn into an inedible item, to the benefit of you having a seed. I get that. But you're not planning to do that. You simply want for it to grow a little bit bigger. That's the illness that we all have. We all want a little bit more. It's good. Ich will noch a bissel. You have a radish, you want the radish to grow another inch. Then you'll be happy. So here, says Rav Mana, if there's no reason to make a gzeira. Really, the Mishnah began with the rule that if you plant ha'oiker shesalam, that's the name of the perek, and you plant it, you're potted. Here, it's because it will become inedible. So if you're planning to take it out prior, then taka, you'll be potted. This will be like the first rule of the Mishnah. Aber says, again, Rabbi Chia, we had a lot of Rabbi Chia b'shem Rabbi Yechanan recently. So Rabbi Chia b'shem Rabbi Yechanan, I disagree with you. That we say, Bein loishanya, no, we don't make such a differentiation. Loishanya, bein lezera, which is the case that the Mishnah speaks out. And even in the case that you intend to eat it after replanting it, you're only putting it in the ground for a short amount of time. Even over there, bein loichal, chayav. Why? Because when the Mishnah says that you're chayav, the Mishnah adds the words, mipnei shehu goyrenon, which means lefes and radishes, these items, the Mishnah says these words. What is its gemar malacha? When you uproot it the first time. Normally by produce, what's the gemar malacha? Not just when you harvest it. You have to harvest it, you have to gather it, you have to bundle it. These items, the Mishnah says, that we view it as if, the Chachamim viewed it as if, that when you uprooted it, it's gemar malacha. If it's a gemar malacha, you have to do it. The reason why the Chachamim said it is because they didn't want you to replant it and not be ma'aser. That's the reason. You're right, theoretically, in your specific case that you are only replanting it loichal, it will be edible. But once the Chachamim said, mipnei shehu goyrenon, bottom line is, now the Chachamim says the harvest is the goyren. Goyren means gemar malacha. Once you have gemar malacha, you have to be ma'aser. Okay. Look inside the Rashi Ilio, second line in the left, second line from the top. Now, why am I reading it? Because he has another girsa. So he says, just his girsa, period. That's it. And on that asks the Gemara, that's according to the girsa of the Rashi Ilyo, you see 2 lines from the top on the left, but does the Mishnah not write? Which means, the way that Rashi Ilyo learns this line, mimasnis and parech, the mashma the tamay hu she'ein lohem goyden acher elozeh. Fakert. That's the way he learns pshat, not the way we learned it. The way that Rashi Ilyo has a different girsa. The Gemara says vehotanina. Since the Mishnah says mipnei shu gardenon adarabah, the Mishnah is saying that the reason why you have to be ma'aserit before you replant it is because that's the only goyden that brings you to maisras. Meaning that the second time around, when you harvest it the second time, when you leave it a long time, there's no food left. So there's no goyden. Fakert. Should that not mean, asks the Gemara, that when there will be another goyden, then there is no gzeira. Let's go with that. So on that answers the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Chanina. I'll tell you why. According to Rabbi Yechanan. Again, this is a hemshuk to what we learned yesterday of tevel batel beroiv. And we said, guys, don't forget, even this is Rabbi Yechanan. Tevel batel beroiv, even Rabbi Yechanan, by tevel midrabanan. Vegetables are midrabanan. Vegetables, not only that, we learned yesterday that even olives and grapes, that some of the Rishonim hold is doiraisa, Our Gemara Yerushalmi holds the only doiraisa are the 5 grains and actual tirosh veyitzar. Not olives and grapes, not grapes and olives. Okay. So what's the case of Rabbi Yechanan? I'll tell you the case. You harvested the radishes on year number 2. If you were to eat it, what would you separate Meiser Sheni? You're replanting it. Fine. You're not going to leave it until it becomes inedible. You're going to replant it. I don't know how long it takes. Let's say it takes a month to it to grow, and it takes 3 months for it to become inedible. You're going to only plant it for a month. But when you harvest it round 2, it's going to be the 3rd year. Don't forget, by vegetables, basar, liki, tosoi, isuroi. How do we determine the year? From when you harvested it. Now I got a problem. Why do I have a problem? Because theoretically, what should be done theoretically? That which grew originally should be Meiser Shenit. That which was added, the Gidulin, should be Meiser Anit. In reality, you're not going to do that because Tavel Batal Baroif. If you're going to have more Meiser Ani than Meiser Sheni, then the Meiser Sheni will no longer be taken off. We're going to view it as Meiser Ani vegetable. Same thing in the other way around. If you're going to have more original than what the Gidulin, then the Tevel Batal Baroif. And because of that, you won't give the part Meiser Sheni to Yerushalmi and the part Meiser Ani to the Ani. You won't do it that way. You're going to either give it all this or all that. We don't want for that bittul to happen. Since we don't want for that bittul to happen, that's the logic behind Rabbi Yechanan. Gavaldik. Let's read it inside. Amar Rabbi Chanina, mipnei shu machnisen min hasheni la'ani. Shu machnisen min hasheni. Min hasheni means from the 2nd year into the ani means into the 3rd year, which is the year of Meiser Ani. Or the case of Rabbi Yechanan will be is that the first time around when you harvested the lefes and the tsunoi noise, you harvested it min ha'ani, the year number 3. You're going to replant it and it's going to have its gedulin to eat in the 4th year. Okay, so you're going from ani to sheni. And again, you have to add these words. And you're going to have a bittul. And once the bittul happens, it's going to happen. But we don't want the bittul to happen. So what's the solution? Before you replant it, take off meiser sheni. Let's go 2nd year. Replant it. Whatever, you only have to be ma'aser from the additional. And from the additional, be ma'aser, give meiser ani. So every year will get its fair Maisres Gavaldik. 2 applications of Teva Batal Beroiv and how we don't like to rely on that. And because of that, we have this din, the exception. Before replanting, be ma'asir, replant, and be ma'asir again. The 2nd time, you're not ma'asir on everything. You're only ma'asir on the Gidulin. Clear. Gavaldik. Vlad has a look in his eyes. I don't know if it needs coffee or if he has a bomb question.
I mean, how could you tell the difference when you do it from the original plant, just of the extra growth?
Just on the extra growth. No, Vlad is being, listen, practically, I don't know how to tell. I didn't even know how to tell when I eat the radish stam. I don't know what I'm looking at. Someone told me it's a radish. These are farmers. This is as close as we get to farming. I'm trying to visualize the farmer. You're trying to visualize the radish. Big difference. Trying to visualize the yid that is because you're Russian. I want to know that when the Mittler Rebbe, when he basically established Lubavitch and he moved all of the thousands of Lubavitcher families to the Kherson region, and they didn't want to go there for 2 reasons. Number one is they didn't want to be far away from the Rebbe. And the Rebbe says he's going to go there every summer to teach them Hasidus. It turned out at the end that the Mittler Rebbe wasn't physically healthy, so he couldn't go. So he sent Rabbi Hillel Paritcher. That's how the Hillel Paritcher became the big chayzer. And number 2, they told the Rebbe, we don't want to become farmers. And the Mittler Rebbe gave it to them. He says, this is what Hashem had in mind for our grandparents when he settled us in Eretz Yisrael under Yeshua. This is what we're meant to do. Avodas haaretz. And I'll tell you something, for all the people here that have businesses, I think your fantasy is just to become a farmer. No, all of the headaches, all of the real stress headaches you won't have over there. The only headache is, will it rain, will it not rain? That you have with God. We all have with God. After that, grass is greener. Everything by farmers are just wonderful. Okay, let's think about that. Okay, next case. The next case, which will be the whole topic until the end of today's share, is the onions that were put on the gag that happen to have soil on it. It must be that way. Soil, dirt, earth. I was just by a burial a couple of weeks ago, and the officiating rabbi spoke about throwing the dirt, not throwing the dirt. Didn't sound so good. Throw the soil. There's a nicer, right? The dirt. But it is what it is. So here, what happened was I put it for storage, and it took root. So, but Salam Shishrishu. So the Mishnah, what the Mishnah writes is, for Tuma, it's considered planted, which means even if it's Tameh, it became Tahar. Okay, we already spoke out the intro. We're not going to repeat it. So now, what not the Mishnah spoke about, not what's implied that we spoke out, which we'll have today at the end of Mem Amud Beis, the Tosefta, not Tuma, not Maisris, not Shvius, a topic that the Tanoim did not talk about is Shabbos. Someone put those onions on the attic, and the balabas decided to take an onion, and he picked it up. Was he mechal Shabbos midoiraisa? Did you detach it, or at least say that since for Maisris it's not called attached, so for Shabbos it's not called attached? So machlek Rabbi Yochanan b'shem Rabbi Yanai arema shel b'tzalim sheishrisha. Now, the word arema is very consequential. The Mishnah said bitzalim. Now, I know bitzalim is lashon abim, but I want you to visualize something. There is a big difference whether the onions were placed out, I'll tell you why, or if the onions were placed in a pile. People that want to replant something, you don't replant piles of vegetables. You don't do it that way. You place them individually. The very fact that you made an arema shows, right, your machshava is nikr mitoich masayim, that your kavana, your intention is not to replant it, just the storage. That's how people store things. Okay, and we're going to get back to that at the end of today's stuff. So you have a pile of bitzalim, and the Marafulda writes that even though when you read the words b'shem Rabbi Yanai, like, how do you know he's talking about the same case of the Mishnah? We don't know. We're talking about an attic. All these things are big nafkamina. An attic, even though that it's all mechubar lakarka. We spoke about that for kavura. There's nothing wrong burying people in a wall, like in Hara Menuchas they have over here in LA. But in the ground is one thing, above the ground is something else. How do we know that B'Shem Rabbi Yana he's speaking about Anan Aliyah, even though he didn't say it? The Mara Fulda, look at his logic. He says, the fact that the Gemara brings Rabbi Yochanan and B'Shem Rabbi Yana here on the Mishnah, we somehow knew that he was talking about Ba'aliyah. Look inside the Marafulda, 3 lines from the bottom. Right? Arei Makri, that's a pile. Shehishrishu Ba'aliyah Maida. We want to make the case of the Mishnah. How do we know that? Since Rabbi Yanai made this comment after he learned this Mishnah, so therefore it's understood that he's speaking about the same case. Okay, so now we're speaking about the case of the Mishnah, and what happened? Shetoilish mehen b'Shabbos. You did an act of toilish. Toilish is asur midoiraisa. Let's use the word chayiv chatas. Chayiv chatas is used really chayiv skila because ata berisha skinan. Just the way we're not talking about someone that's machal Shabbos b'mezid. We're talking about someone that did it by accident, and the question is whether they have to bring a korban chatas. So for that, Rabbi Yochanan b'shem Rabbi Yanai, no, you're not chayiv chatas. Potter avol asur, clear. It's going to be asur midrabanan. Everyone writes that. Look inside the Rashi earlier, 2 lines from the bottom. Potter avol asur, period. But you're not chayv. And why? So what the words that Rabbi Yanai said was because she'ena roitze bahashrashan, which means, I just want to make that nuance. It's not because he did not intend to plant it. It's more than that. He did not want to plant it. Dafka lav. No, there's lav dafka and dafka lav. It's different. He didn't want to, what's that? He didn't want to plant it. The fact that he made a pile, he's showing he doesn't want to plant it. You can argue like maybe he didn't want to plant it, but he's happy he doesn't want. They don't want. You want to just store it. And I want to add another detail, even though the Gemara doesn't say it, but that's what the Noise Kalim say. Compounded with the fact that it's unusual planting. When you plant vegetables, they are in the ground. Even in the next piece in the Mishnah, when the Mishnah spoke about the mapoilas that fell, the Mishnah says it was partially exposed, partially underground. This is completely exposed. Only the roots went in the ground, and we're putting both together. So it doesn't look like the normal planting. And you did not want to plant it. Now, there's a big chiddush here. What's the big chiddush here? Because come on, Shabbos. At the end of the day, you detached it. The answer is, let's use the words maleches machshavas. For those of us who are learning Rambam now, that maleches machshavas asra toida, that's normally applied only when it comes to the act of the violation. That when I violate Shabbos, for it to be considered an act of labor, I have to be doing that with intent. We're expanding that. For me, for you to say, for the Torah to say that Reuven accidentally picked up this onion, he didn't even know it's attached. Or that he did an act of detaching, for the Torah to say that you have to first define what was as planted. For Shabbos, meleches machshavas asra Torah would mean that since his intent, he didn't want it to be planted, the Torah does not say that it's planted. Even though biologically, it is planted. Even though for Hilchos Tumah V'Tara, it's considered planted.
I think there was dirt on the rooftop. There was existing dirt on the rooftop.
On the rooftop, yeah.
Would he not expect it to grow then?
Because it's very little dirt. And he never went to Cheder Menachem. He went to another Charedish Cheder that there was no science experiment. He knew nothing. He put it. Someone told him, you put it to store. Okay. And on that, Daf Mem Amid Beis, Amalei Reb Shimon ben Lakish, you're wrong. Why are you wrong? My ikaflaps, a new word. Why are you, the Marafulder writes, Medame, why are you comparing Shabbos? Gabe Maisres. Because as we mentioned, what's implied in the Mishnah, only Le'inyan Tuma is it considered attached. Le'inyan Maisres, we'll have it clear at the end of this Amid. Le'inyan Maisres, it's not considered attached. If it actually grew more, you're not Ma'asir de Gidulin, because it's not attached. Why are you comparing Shabbos to Maisres? Loi Taninon, did we not learn? And now he's quoting a Mishnah Masechtas Kelim, which is really great. Now, guys, I remember this Mishnah. This Mishnah did not speak about the case we had over here. It's very important. The Mishnah was speaking about someone that put vegetables in the ground, under the earth, for freshness, for storage. And the Mishnah is speaking about a case where they did not take root. The guy that did it knew what he was doing. Mistama, every vegetable has a certain amount of time. It takes X amount of time. Simply today you have a fridge. That's what they did. It was very hot. The guy said 6 hours. He put it under the ground. So that's a big, the Mishnah speaks about when you have something that Bechlal did not take root, that's going to be the diuk of Reish Lakish. There the Mishnah says, don't forget, you're not allowed to mix in the Holy Land different seeds. So the guy put it in the earth right near another vegetable patch. Or he put it in a vineyard, which is even worse. So the Mishnah says, since it didn't take root, there's absolutely no problem. There's no violation of Kalayim. And even if while it was under the ground, it became bigger, but there was no root, just grew from the air, it had already enough nourishment in it to have some addition. We don't say Sviche Shvias is awesome midrabanan. It's important. Sviche Shvias means all products that grow on their own without intent. Even though midoy raisa, you can eat it. Midrabanan, you're not allowed to eat it because the Chachamim were afraid that you're going to plant it on the 7th year. It's a big temptation. And you're going to say it grew on its own. We also learned there are exceptions to that. But we don't say there's an issue of Shvius, all because it didn't take root. And that's the bomb question of Reish Lakish. And the Mishnah says, and that is allowed to be taken on Shabbos. Now, if you remember, first of all, the words is, Vinitalim b'Shabbos, just for the record, is muter, not patarabel, muter. It didn't take root. You know what the issue was in Kalayim about muktzah? We learned all about this, that when you put it under the ground, then there is dirt or earth on top of it. Guys, do you know that dirt and earth is mamash muktzah? A sandbox is different because the sand that was placed in the sandbox was placed there before Shabbos and it was designated for people to play with it. That's okay. But stam, earth, is muktzah. Now, doesn't mean I'm not allowed to walk on the beach on Shabbos. I am, because my intention is not to move it. And the moving it is called tiltul min hatzad. Tiltul min hatzad is mutter, by muktzah. Right, in Shulchan Aruch we use the words kela achayad. In the Chazal, a lot more min hatzad. So it's time to know that the issue over there, Vinatolim B'Shabbos, is two. Is it attached? Then you're being chayiv toilish, right? Tulda de katz ksira. And then the muksa issue is not an issue because you're not moving the earth to take out the vegetable. We spoke out over there that you left up a leaf sticking up. You're simply picking up the leaf. The fact that the earth that was on top of it falls to the sides, you didn't move it directly, and there's no problem. Okay. The point that the Reish Lakish is proving is that since we have a Mishnah that's telling you are allowed to do it dafke in the case where it did not take root, he is inferring from that Mishnah that proves that if it would take root, he's going, then it's chayiv. The Shlakish can also say, you're right, the Mishnah says muter, even though the Mishnah doesn't say the words. The Mishnah says vinitolin b'Shabbos. Now, we adhere to rabbinic law. When the Mishnah says you can take it out of the ground on Shabbos, that means it's not even asan midarabanan. Reish Lakish will say, yeah, that you can take out on Shabbos muter, and if in the case of our Mishnah, it's pater, avolasur. But anyway, so that could be an answer. The point of Reish Lakish is that he holds, when is there a non-issue? When it didn't take root. Here, it took root.
How about if it didn't take root, it's not in the ground anyway?
I disagree with you. One can argue. Listen, again, I'm not a botanist. If you have an onion in the ground for storage and it grows a little bit, I don't know, ask a scientist, how did it grow? Oh, it's a chiddush to say that
the only way it can grow is water or dirt. So if it's not,
let's go with the water. Maybe. So maybe in other words, let's say the water from the soil around it went into it and it grew. One might have thought that additional growth should be sviche shvis. In other words, there is a novelty. Okay. Anyways, the Yerushalmi is mekatzed. I understand. There's no need to say what Rabbi Yechanan responded. Point is, one thing is clear, is that Reish Lakish challenged Rabbi Yechanan for Shabbos. Now we have to add the following. Reish Lakish will say that Meleches Machshavas Asra Torah is only to be used when you are analyzing your act of Chilul Shabbos, your labor, whether it's Machshavas or not. Rabbi Yechanan is being mechadash huge. Rabbi Yechanan is holding, it's not about me picking it off the roof. That's Meleches Machshavas. That was my intention, to take the onion downstairs to put it into my salad. He's saying that since when you put it on the roof, you didn't want it to take root, so it's not planted. He's expanding where we use the Meleches Machshavas, which is a big novelty. And Reish Lakish can say, no, Meleches Machshavas is when you're analyzing the Malacha, not the Mitzias that already happened before the Malacha. For some,
do they look at it as being planted or not?
That's right. Imagine. And that's not the way, that's not.
If it's not planted, then everybody would agree you could pull it out.
That's right.
Like the case where it's,
That's right. Like case in the Mishnah and Kalayim. Very good. Okay.
How about if it grows on a rooftop due to condensation, you can touch that on Shabbat, right?
One more time.
If you have an onion on a rooftop and it starts growing because of the rooftop condensation, or just
if it's not considered attached, then you can take it on Shabbos. Exactly.
Okay. Right.
That's what we're learning. Even better. Here you're not even moving the earth. Here it's on top of here it's laying on the ground. It's exposed.
Just checking.
I want you to know that in the Yerushalmi, the rules that we have in the Babli, that Amiroim never argue with Tanoim, already we felt this in the beginning, is not so hard and fast. For whatever reason, whether, don't forget, Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish are from the first generation Amiroim. Mamish. Rabbi Yechanan, like Rav, Reish Lakish was his contemporary, brother-in-law contemporary. The Gemara takes it as a given that Reish Lakish would have the ability to challenge the Tosefta. Even though we didn't yet read the Tosefta, we're going to read it at the end of the Amid, but we already spoke it down in the Mishnah. That means if you look good in the Mishnah, you'll read in between the lines, which they expect you to read in between the lines, the fact that the Mishnah gives two cases. And in the first case, where there's nothing on top of it, it's not that something fell on top of it, it's just placed on the roof for storage. And the Mishnah says that it becomes tahar from Tumah. That's the way Rabbeinu HaKadosh is saying, but not from Maasros and not for Shvius. Reish Lakish, just for the record, could have used the Mishnah that we just read in Kalayim, and he could have challenged Shvius the way he challenged Shabbos. Mishnah in Kalayim When the Mishnah says that there is no issue of kalayim, is only speaking about the case where it bechlal did not take root. He could have made the same diuk. So be medayik from that Mishnah that if the onion that you placed in the ground did take root, then you do have a problem of svichis shviz. And let's apply it to the case of the roof, even though you can't compare one case to the other. Why can you not compare one case to the other? Because in the Mishnah of kalayim, you put it under the earth. In our Mishnah, you put it above the earth. That's why I'm saying there are 2 points over here. Even though on the end of Amem Amad Aleph, we only spoke out your point of your intention, that your intention was for storage, you didn't want to plant it, there is another component that's running the whole daf over here. But if that would be relevant, then the whole kasha of Reish Lakish would fall to the side. What's Reish Lakish's question against Rabbi Yochanan? From the Mishnah in Kalayim, we see that it didn't take root. That's why it's not an issue, which means if it took root, there is an issue. One answer would be, what are you talking about? The Mishnah in Kalayim, it's under the ground. At least it looks like it's planted, even though your intention was for storage. In our Mishnah, it's on top of the ground. He didn't say that. He doesn't care for that. If he doesn't care for that, then I have a question. Why did he not challenge the Tosefta that writes explicitly in our case that if this onion grows in Gedulin, it's not there's no isur of Svichei Shvius. You can ask the same kasha. From the Mishnah in Kalayim, it's mashma. When the Mishnah writes, there's no issue of Shvius. The Mishnah in Kalayim is it did not take any shaydish. There's no root. Which means if it does take root, there is an issue of Shvius. The Shlakish did not ask that question. He only challenged Rabbi Yochanan's Shabbos statement. He did not Shabbos the Tosefta. Why? So we are inferring from that Reish Lakish agrees. He holds that Shabbos, let's say it's easy. We have to be the most machmir for Shabbos. He's saying Shabbos, it's detached. You're going to detach it. If for too much itar, you can't do that. Okay. So that's what the Gemara is really going to say right now. Amar Rab Ze'era l'Rabba Bohu. Take a look at what Reish Lakish says. Rab Shlakish has a Mishnah, has a diuk from a Mishnah in Kalayim. And what did he challenge? He only challenged Rabbi Yochanan. How do we know that those were his words? Because Lei Amar Ella, what was his words? That was the beginning of the Amit. That Ma ikafla, which means, why are you medame Shabbos to Maisres? To Maisres. Which means, but to Shvi'is, Hoshvi'is, ikafla. Which means that even a Shlakish will agree that for Shvi'is, don't forget guys, Shvi'is is only in Isur D'Rabbanan. Detaching on Shabbos is an Isur D'Oraisa. He also is Maida that if Shvi'is, that only She'im Hoya Roitza B'Hashrashan, only if you wanted for it to take root, and a taka took root, and it grew, then She'im Asurim Mishum Svichim. But if not, even if they actually took root, Mutare Mishum Svichim. Don't forget another thing, guys. Svichim, by default, you know what svicha means? Svicha means something that grew on its own. All svichim grew on its own. If you had intent, it's not svichim. If you didn't have intention, then
All right, question?
If you planted something in the last third of the 6th year, or you put it in the ground, at least I don't know if you publish the basic planting it, but you put it in the ground, and then it has streaked, you can pull it out.
No. If I planted something on the 6th year, if I remember correctly, if I did not harvest it on the 6th year, even though we had exceptions to that, I will not be allowed to harvest it on the 7th year. What is Danny talking about? You cannot. No. Because if the planting was no mekavana, and then what year does it belong to? B'chlal. No. It generally it has to do with basar liki tase isurai. Has to do with the year of the harvest. I know we learned in Shvi'is that if it was completely ripe, we learn new things in the Gemara that we didn't learn in the Rambam. The general rule is by vegetables, no, it goes after when you harvested it. If I planted it, Vlad, you do have an. If I planted it, it's not even called tzvichim. It's not even called tzvichim. Point is again, since Reish Lakish Keilu could have argued on the Tosefta, amazing, but he didn't. He only argued on Shabbos. So let's go that Reish Lakish is moide that for Shvi'is, he's moide to what we are inferring from the Mishnah. He's agreeing with Rabbi Yochanan. It's not considered attached. However, says the Gemara, I disagree with you. Nisht emes, even though Reish Lakish verbalized his disagreement with Rabbi Yechanan le'inyan Shabbos, from that understand that he also argues for Shvius. Like, which one should he mention? He doesn't have to mention both. So we're going to see why it was even a bigger chiddush for him to argue for Shabbos. If he argues with Shabbos, keilu kol shchein, he argues for Shvius. And let's get that kol shchein inside the Gemara. So Amar Rabbi Miyasha to Rab Ze'era, you Rab Ze'era hold that Reish Lakish only argues with Rabbi Yechanan le'inyan Shabbos. Le'inyan Shvius, he agrees to the Tosefta. And I disagree with you. That he deruba means he argues with both. But the way it works is you have to pick your fight where there's even a greater novelty. Once you argue with the deruba, then it's self-understood, you argue with the less novelty. Look inside the Marafulda, in middle of under the Gemara. It's around 10 lines from the bottom. V'dahi deruba. V'dahi deruba says, V'zoisi haravusa, koloimer. Given the Palagas Shabbos, no, he argues with both. He only needed to argue with Shabbos. And from there, Kol Shchein HaShvi. Why? So let's read inside the Mara. The Shabbos itzrach alei l'reish lakish. Doloi tema the moideba mishum the dafke meleches machsheves asra toira lafuke ki eino roitza chulei. See, invited. By Shabbos, we do have this unique. What's unique? Meleches machsheves. You would think that he would be moide to Rabbi Yechanan. Komash Malan, that even though Yitaka need meleches machsheves, but that meleches machsheves is to define the labor, not to define the mitzias that happened before Shabbos. Once he even argues on Shabbos, for sure he argues on Shvius. That means Reish Lakish indeed is being medaik from the Mishnah in Masechtas Kalayim that only when the item does not take root, then do you not have an issue of Shvius. When it does take root, Bain if it's under the ground, Bain if it's over the ground, you have to worry about the Svichim, Gevaldik. And then let's go and then he adds. What does he add? That Ilu Tane Batzel. If Rabbi Yechanan, remember we started on the bottom of Mem, the Arema, a Kri. If Rabbi Yechanan would have spoken about someone who only put one onion on the roof, which might have been the way you can understand the Mishnah, then Ya'us, then I would agree with you. Then the bigger Chiddush would have been to argue with Shvius. What does that mean? Let's go back in the Marafulda. Okay, around 8 lines from the bottom. Ilu have Tana Batzal Yichidi. Tana, it's amazing. Tana means not the way it means in the Bavli. Tana means Rabbi Yechanan, calling him a Tana here. That if he would have taught his din using the example of an individual onion, Vistam Batzal Yichidi, Mechzet Fei, Shemikivan Shemachavan Lishasilo Zriya, if he would have put one onion, you don't know that he didn't want to plant it. You don't know that he did not want to plant it. Maybe he wanted to plant it, because when you plant it, you spread them out. Then, Shaper Hayinu Yecholim Lohichiach, that what? That since it looks like you wanted to plant it, the Shlakish has the right to say it's more problematic. It's more problematic. Yechayv, which is what he says. The Moide B'Shvius. But maybe by Shvius not. The Imloi Kain, Hoyeloi Lekvei Kushiyasi after Sefta Shvius. The Loi Be'in Kavanah Zriya. Vafilo ha'acheri Shlakish Choishes Mishum Shvius Kol Shchein Shabbos. Ella Vadai the Moide Hasam the Kilei Shvius Mishabbos. You would have been right. Aval hashda the Tani Arema. Rabbi Yechanan spoke about a pile. Vadai the Moide Hasam the Kilei Shvius Mishabbos. I'm sorry, I skipped that. Aval hashda the Tani Arema Adarabo. Yesh likvoya kushiyase ad Rabbi Yechanan. The Shlakish wants to say that even if it's evident that you did not want to plant it. And the Shlakish is arguing that what? Even though your machshava of not wanting to plant it is nikeres metoich masa by making a pile, still your chayiv chatos, it's considered attached. For sure by Shvius, it's considered attached, and it's also mishum Shvius. The only time you don't have to worry about Shvius, Lere Shlakish, is if it has no root. And now let's just read the words of the Braisa. We never, the Tosefta, we never read the words. So this is the words now of the Tana. Now we're going to the Tosefta. Hishrishu bekupa. Now this is not the case of the Mishnah. This is where you put it in a box. Guys, box is different than the roof. Box looks even less like planting it. You have a box. In the box, there's dirt or soil or earth, however you want to word it. And you put it in there for storage. but it's even further from looking like you're planting it in the. This is like an utzitz she'enoi nakov. I'm giving just a mashal where we already know that at midai rice it's not called planted. Shrishu bekupa. What's becheskasan? They remain detached. It began detached, they remain detached. Lamaisris, uleshvius. You got that? And now, 1 second. How is it different than so? It's like the gag. No, it's even more. Since it's in a box, it won't even become tar. Since it's in a box, it will not even become tar. Because it completely does not look like it's planted. However, Daf Mem Aleph, if the Tosefta gives now the case of our Mishnah, if the onions were in the attic, it's not in a box, it's on the attic. The onion is not under the ground, the onion is above the ground, but the roots went in the ground. Now, these are the words. But if they were tamei, that's our Mishnah. So Bekit said, Shabbos, Machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Will Reish Lakish also argue by Shvius that we have a machlokes?